Where we left off 2 weeks ago was, so again, in chapter 20th, and by Ulamashal. But before that, the Alter Rebbe speaks about the oneness of Hashem. What does it mean when we say the oneness of Hashem? That Hashem is Echad, Hashem is one. When we say Shema Yisrael, right? That, in other words, we proclaim the oneness of Hashem. What does that mean? That there's no two gods? Is that the idea of Hashem Echad, that there's no two gods? Not at all. It's not the message. It's not the proclamation. To say that, we come to shul and we proclaim Hashem Echad, that you should know the whole energy which vitalizes the world and is the existence of everything is not two. There's no two separate energies. It's all one. That's not the message. The message of Hashem Echad is that ultimately everything is part of the oneness of Hashem. In other words, it's not that there's a God and there's another entity which is the world, and Hashem is in charge of the world. He controls the world. He's the balabais. In other words, the one who is totally has the total authority. That doesn't mean that is not the case, because ultimately then you're saying that the world has a separate entity to some degree. Hashem Echad means that everything is part of the oneness of Hashem. We said the other week, it was actually corresponding to the portion of the week when Avraham Avinu demonstrated the oneness of Hashem. He says it didn't say Hashem, Vayikra Hashem, Sham B'Shem Hashem Keil Olam. It doesn't say Keil Olam, which means that Keil HaOlam, like we know, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam, that Hashem is the God of the world. But the expression there, the pasuk is Keil Olam. That means, and the difference, it seems to be the same, but the difference is enormous. The difference is the difference of the two is very stark, because when you say Keil HaOlam, means to say there is Olam, there's a world, and Hashem is Keil of the Olam, right? The Hebrew HaOlam. But when you say Keil Olam, means to say that you look at the Olam, that's part of the Keil, that's part of the God. It's not two separate entities. So this is the message which Alter Rebbe was conveying up till now, and for this it gives a metaphor, for this it gives a mashal. So just to add one little other, where it was cut off previously, where we stopped and was a bit cut off, the Alter Rebbe says something interesting. He says that he bases on this, which we say every single day in prayer, that Hashem vitalizes every single day, but more than that, not only every single day, every single moment, Hashem vitalizes creation. Which means it's not that Hashem just created the world 6,000 years ago, or 5,774 years ago, and then it just remains as it is. No, Hashem pumps in this energy every single moment. What does that tell us? That the reality of everything is the Dvar Hashem, is the godly energy which exists in it. In other words, that itself says Keil Olam, which means that every part of every creation is ultimately the energy of Hashem. If Hashem is pulled, Hashem does not give it the chayis this moment, Hashem does not give it the energy this moment, it would cease to exist. Right? We mentioned the last class also that it's not like something like we think to ourselves. Let's say take a electronic device, right? If you don't put in the plug, if you don't put the plug in rather to the outlet,
it's like a lump. But as long as it's plugged in, it's lit. You plug it,
right? You pull the plug, but in the end of the day, the device still exists. Right. It has no function. Right? Take a toaster. If you don't put the plug in, there's no energy coming, so that it won't have an effect on the bread. The bread won't be toasted, right? But will the toaster disappear? No, it's still there. Take a tape recorder. It's useless. It's a piece of plastic or whatever the material is. So it doesn't have any use to us if the plug is not in. If the plug is in, it works. The music and so on, whatever the function of the tape recorder or the radio, etc. Right? And if you pull the plug, there's no energy, so it's useless. But does the tape recorder disappear? No, it doesn't, because it's still an existent entity without the energy which is coming from the outlet, not ultimately from the generator. if Hashem pulled out the energy from this table right now, it wouldn't be like a broken table or a dysfunction table. It just would not exist. It would literally disappear.
Back to nothingness.
Sorry?
Back to where it came from.
Exactly. In other words, it disappear means to say that every fiber, every part of the table, as we see it, ultimately is the Dvar Hashem, is God's energy. So it has nothing else other than God's energy. The whole makeup of the table is God's energy. Like we tried to say last week, it's not like, there's an opening by the table and Hashem shoots in the energy, closes it up, now it exists. No, if you say that, okay, you take it out, so it'll decay, it'll shimmel after they know. It's not like that. It's every part of the table. There's the Dvar Hashem, Hashem's chayis, which is mechadesh b'chol yom tamid. And not only he says, no, it's not only every day, every moment Hashem pumps in the energy into this table, means to say that every part of the table is completely not only dependent on God, it is the Dvar Hashem, it is the godly energy. Again, that's the difference. I always say, Keil ha'olam. Then there's the world and Hashem is in charge. We say Keil Olam. We say the makeup, the texture of everything is ultimately God. Very big difference, very profound difference. So where we left off, actually, it was cut off also, that the why are we compelled to say? It's important to understand this prior to we go on in the metaphor which the Alter Rebbe brings at this time. Why is it we so compelled to say that Hashem constantly pumps the energy into creation? Why can't we say, theoretically, that Hashem created the world as it is in the time of creation, 5,774 years ago, and it just remained? Why are we compelled to say, and again this becomes the nusach of every day, of every sidur for that matter, every nusach, that Hashem pumps the energy into creation? But why are we compelled to say that He constantly pumps the energy into creation? Why can't we say He just created the world at a certain time, and that's how it is? So true, in the very beginning of creation, there was nothing as no thing, right? There was only God prior to creation, and I understand. And the world doesn't have its own existence other than God. That's fine. There was nothing before Hashem created the world, and Hashem brought the world in creation. So we understand that the world is completely, in other words, its whole existence is dependent on Hashem's decision to create it. That's fine. That I understand. But maybe that's the way it was, and that keeps on existing, in other words, from the day of creation. Who says, what compels us to say that Hashem constantly creates the world? So we gave a little example then of somebody, for example, and the basis of this example is that when you do something opposite than the nature, that you do something opposite than the nature in which, to the object in which you're dealing with or you're doing, you constantly have to re-energize or reinvest in order that this should function contrary to its nature. And we gave the example, instead of leaving it complicated. Take, for example, a ball.
Yeah,
right?
You have the object that you want to keep it in the air. You have to constantly apply physical strain to keep it in the air, because if you let it go,
exactly, it's going to fall. And more than that, excellent example. More than that, take the example, take that object itself. Try to throw it up. For a few moments, or like take a ball, you could throw it up, it could be a nice 60 seconds, it could go, full minute maybe, or less, whatever it is. It can't go too much, right? Whatever it is, how long it will go, even you put a lot of energy and a lot of force, it'll come a certain moment, it'll slow down, stop, and go back to where it would originally gravitate to. Because a ball gravitates downwards. When you throw a ball and you're able to do opposite than the nature of the ball, which again in the ball gravitating downwards, you infuse your energy into the ball in order it should go opposite than its natural direction. So then it's just because there's a certain energy of yours infused in that ball, which is making it go opposite, that it's in the opposite direction that it naturally would go. And again, where it would naturally gravitate downwards, you're doing something which is opposite, but only, it's, in other words, when you take the ball and you throw it, it doesn't become a flying ball that is just going to, because you see it going the opposite direction, it'll go there forever. No. Because you didn't change, because the nature of the ball didn't change. You're able to invest a certain energy of yourself in the ball that it should go opposite direction, but that'll slow down, and that'll stop to a certain, the ball will stop at a certain point, and then it'll go back to its return. So what that shows is anything which is contrary to the nature of something, it has to be constantly suffused with other energy which should push in the opposite direction. Similarly, when we say before Hashem created the world, there was no world. What does it say? It was just HaKadosh Baruch Hu was named. There was no world. When Hashem said, Bereshis bara Elokim shemayim v'ha'aretz, when Hashem created in the first 6 days of creation, He spoke creation into being, then creation came to being. So what was the nature of things prior to Hashem created the world? You can't really use, ideally, or it's not an accurate term to use the nature of things prior to Hashem creating the world, because the whole phenomenon of nature, correct, is only when the world came to being. Then there's the phenomenon which is called nature. But let's use it ideally. The nature of the reality was that there was no world. It was only Hashem. So when Hashem does something different, opposite than the way things naturally ought to be, in other words, only Hashem, He brings a world into creation that's like taking a ball which would go downwards and trying to throw it upwards. So the only reason, in other words, Hashem, therefore we must, that itself compels us to say that when you see 5 minutes after Hashem created the world, in 10 minutes or 10 days or 10 hours or 10 years or 1,000 years, the world still does exist, is because Hashem is constantly pumping in the energy into creation, because if not, it will completely cease to nothing.
But we could say that Hashem could have invested sort of in one shot enough energy into the world to let it sort of coast to live for X number of thousands of years. He could do that, right? It's like sort of like
which means like in the example of the ball.
Like example of the ball, where we threw so hard that it flies for
let's say for 30 seconds. And Hashem's energy pumps
2,000 years it flies.
Right. So just like in our case, we could do it for 30 seconds. Hashem could do it for 3,000 years. First of all,
maybe not, because the amount of energy that you need, you would burst the object. So that's
it would be too much.
It needed to supply it with just enough.
In a sense, in one sense. But on the other hand, if you really want to equate the two, the example, this metaphor, it's not a big question, because when the ball is going upwards for those 30 seconds, and you want to compare it to God's, multiple energies, which goes into the world. In other words, it's not 30 seconds; it could be 3,000 years or 6,000 years, right? Which actually the world was created for 6,000 years. So you want to compare that, right? So we say, God's much stronger. His might is so much more intense. His might is much more potent than the energy which we invest in the ball. So we could do for 30 seconds. Hashem could do for 6,000 years. But in the end of the day, it's not a contradiction, because when the ball is going upwards, for example, it's also because your energy which is there is infused in that ball, which is making it go the opposite of its direction, its natural direction. So even if you would say that itself says HaMechadish B'Tuvay, He throws His energy, it's the Hashem's energy which is vitalizing it. So if it stops, or if the energy ceases in this moment, then Hashem has to invest the energy into creation. Or theoretically you would say that Hashem infused a certain amount of energy in creation, which will last 6,000 years. In the end of the day, it's still this exact demonstration that the whole makeup of Olam is ultimately Kael, is ultimately God. Any way you look at it, if you say a Mechadish B'Tuvi, that it ceases to exist and it ultimately comes into nothing, and Hashem has to reproduce creation, and there's re-energize, reinvest His energy into creation, or you say that Hashem put it a certain amount so we say Mechadish B'Tuvi because that's how it is. And again, I just don't want to go off, just to note, we said a little example. It means to say that every second, everything ceases to exist, and Hashem has to revitalize it. How come we don't see the interruptions? We gave an example. It's a silly example, but you put on a fan, right? In the end, there's 3 or 4 sticks. But they do very quick. You see, it looks like something's turning. You don't see the interruption between the sticks. And that's the reason why you look at the sun, you don't see... you don't see that the Hashem is pulling the energy and revitalizing the sun. You don't see any interruption because Hashem is doing it on a constant basis. Is He recreating
the all of creation anew every moment?
Yes.
Or does he maintain it in the form that it is?
No, every moment. That's what we say. And as we were saying before is that theoretically.
So every moment it's a brand new creation.
Correct.
It's not.
Exactly. You know, the once expression.
That's hard to think of, because you think, like we exist and we he gives us energy to continue to exist in our state, and when we get older. But you say that actually
every moment.
That's not. But the reason we feel continuity is because of like we don't feel this, obviously. None of
right, because it's so close to each
other. That we've been like we disappear and we resurrected anew every moment. Every moment we don't feel it.
We don't feel it because it's so close. As I said, if you look at the fan, it looks like a round circle. Why? Because it's going so quick that those three pieces are ultimate. In the end, has this image of a round circle, but it's not a round circle. It's not a round circle of a piece of plastic. The same thing. It's so quick, so we don't see how it interrupts. But in the end of the day, it's an interruption, and Hashem is revitalizing the world and every part and parcel of creation. So, in other words, that tells us how much. It enriches the whole phenomenon of Ashkacha Pratis, the divine providence. It doesn't have to be so because a moment before it was so, because it's a new decision when Hashem is infusing, just like He's infusing a new energy into creation. Could be a new decision into creation, which is again enables us to exercise our bitachon, our trust in Hashem. It's in a total different way. It doesn't mean because a moment before something was in a certain way means that a moment later it's going to be so. Because a moment later it's a new energy, a godly energy which is invested in creation. And that is the Peter. So again, which is in every siddur, in every version, but every moment, because the nature of existence, it's so contrary to the essential nature of the way things were, again, prior to creation, which was only Hashem. There's no reason that creation should be. It was something totally new. It's a new phenomenon which naturally, again, we can't use the word naturally. It's not an accurate term. But if you think about it, again, we're borrowing the term nature. Before Hashem created, was obviously only God. Hashem brought this new crazy phenomenon, which is a world, Eilam Eloshin Helam Behester, which is a concealment, a cover-up over the reality of God. By definition, Olam is a Helam Behester. It's a concealment over the reality of God. It's such a chidush. It's way greater. The chidush, in other words, this being a novelty, something so opposite, and the way things ought to be, much worse, much more distant. Essentially different and distant from this, the ball going upwards. Okay, this is something which is incorporated creation. It goes downwards. Fire ascends on high. Again, the truth is, it's the same reason, because fire ascends on high. It also goes to its shayr shemakar, to its root, to its source, as the Rambam explains in the beginning of Mishnah Torah. But ideally, it could be this way, it could be that way. Not everything in creation has the same rules. A wall stands, water flows. Something solid stands, something water flows. I mean, this is incorporated in creation. We say, okay, this has stone or this ball usually goes downwards. It's not a crazy thing that it doesn't go upwards. The whole phenomenon of Eilam is Lashon Helam V'Hester. It's a concealment of the true reality of God. It is so abnormal.
Not only that, the fact that all creation feels its autonomy and it's distinct, that's
part of the Helam V'Hester.
Everything looks right,
independent,
like a separate object.
Right.
Table,
right.
When in fact it all is part of God.
Correct. But that's part of the Helam V'Hester. That's part of the Olam, Melashon Helam V'Hester. It's an Olam which covers up in its own true reality, which the reality of everything is God. So the whole notion of a world coming into being at a certain time, rather a certain moment in Hashem's decision, is some chidush, is a novelty. So in other words, the world, there's no reason for it to exist. So Hashem again repumps in the energy into creation on a constant basis, in a momentary basis. It's not a matter of exactly how it works, a second, a millisecond. In other words, the way his cheshbon is, every moment Hashem re-energizes creation, revitalizes creation, which that itself shows that creation has no entity on its own. That's what Alter Rebbe could conclude if you see the words before ulamashal. If you want to look in, if you see the words, right? If you see the words before ulamashal, it says Eine shalei ki yishabus kol ha'olamis. When I turned the page before, ki yishabus kol ha'olamis aliyeni v'tachteini ma'im liyesh v'chayusam v'kiyumam. The creation of all worlds, the superior and the inferior, from a state of exen, and from a state of ayin to a state of yesh, v'chayusam, their life and kiyumam, and their vitality and their existence, hamikaimam, which brings them into being. They should not return to a state of nothingness, the way it was prior to creation. Hashem's words, Hashem's energy, which is invested in them. And here where we're holding, it comes the lamashal. Alter Rebbe gives us this metaphor, like in the soul of man. When you speak a word, a saying, this word which you're uttering is completely insignificant in comparison to the capability of the human being to speak. How many words does one speak in a day? Countless. Maybe too much, right?
Women.
Countless, what?
Women a little more than that.
yeah. But countless words, right? Take one word and compare it, put it in the face of all the words you have spoken in one day. It's insignificant. Or let's try to take it something which is, before we go into the actual mashal Alter Rebbe gives over here, and again it's very important to follow this because this demonstrates the insignificance of creation with this particular metaphor. But let's just go off a little bit.
Take one. Compare it to Hashem. But compare it to...
Right, no, but I'm saying but precisely this mashal, the way it's associated with the nefesh ha'adam, the soul of man, demonstrates the message with Alter Rebbe saying the insignificance of creation more than any other example. We'll see later. But let's just try to understand it. Take one leaf in comparison to a tree. Well, it has very little significance because on an average tree you have thousands of leaves. One in comparison to thousands is insignificant. What if you say the one leaf in comparison to all the leaves in this entire forest? It loses more its significance because you're dealing with tens and maybe hundreds of millions of leaves. And go on and on and on until you come one leaf in comparison to all the leaves in the world, in the entire world. Billions and trillions in comparison to that, it loses significance. So the Alter Rebbe is basically, or it's like take one drop of water in comparison to a big barrel. But then you go take one drop of water, let's jump to the other extreme, in comparison to the whole Mediterranean. It's completely insignificant. Well, I emptied the Mediterranean, what do you do? Had you emptied it? I took a teaspoon out. Maybe ideally there's no, those, if you think about the word infinity doesn't exist in this realm. So in the end of the day, you did empty maybe a little bit. Even though if you think about it, you could maybe even use the term infinity, the infinite amount of waters in the Mediterranean. But it's ultimately not an accurate term because ultimately all the waters in the Mediterranean is a bunch of teaspoons. But if someone says, well, I made an effect, I emptied I made a little effect in the Mediterranean, I took a teaspoon and I took a water. It's like it's so insignificant, a teaspoon in comparison to the enormous amount of water in the Mediterranean. It doesn't even have any. You can't even say it's a silly. It's even though you could find again that it could be that you happen to do something like that by taking a teaspoon out of the Mediterranean. But in the end of the day, it's a silly statement because it's so insignificant. One teaspoon in comparison to the enormous amount of water which existed. Similarly, take one leaf, but in this case, I say that this is much more of an accurate. Expression, or rather accurate metaphor.
So what is the metaphor?
No, so the metaphor is like this, and the metaphor is like this. Alter Rebbe starts with dibur. Why dibur? Because ultimately this whole world was created by Hashem's word, us. It says ki beko Hashem tzurei lamim. Hashem created the entire world, all the worlds with ko. With ko, it says yud and a k. So all the worlds were created with two letters. It says Olam Haba, world to come, which is more refined, a qualitative world. It was created with the Yud, which is more of a profound us, as we explained in the past, and we'll explain as we go on. And the Hey, the Nivra Elam Hazeh, this world was created. So the whole world, with all its multiplicities and complexities and so on, was created with one letter of HaKadosh. So it does say Basar Mamarot Nivra Ha'olam, that the world was created with 10 sayings, but ultimately it doesn't already the breakdown, the particular energies, but it says in the overall, with Klal, it says with one Hey Hashem created the world. Ki B'koh Hashem Tzur Elamim, and it says Yud Nivra Elam Haba V'Hei Nivra Mazeh. So now we go on in the metaphors, in our speech, take one word, one saying, and place it in the amount of words. Let's say I spoke today, it's insignificant. But he said today goes more so. In the amount of words, not only I spoke today, but I spoke all my life, and what I will speak in the next so many years, Arichas Yamim V'Shanim Tevis, for longevity by every single good person, right? That one letter, it has no significance. But more than that, not only how much I actually uttered, how much I verbally uttered, how much I actually said, but in the capacity, the nafshi hamdaberes, in that ability to speak, it loses, that one word which I actually said loses its significance in comparison, much more in comparison not only to the quantitative words that I actually uttered, that I said, but legabe nafshi hamdaberes, the capacity, the potential that I have to speak, that koach in the nefesh, that energy with the nefesh, which is called nefesh hamdaberes, the koach hamdaber. The energy which speaks, which not everybody has it, not every part of creation. A table can't speak. An animal which maneuvers and functions as a davar chai, is something that cannot speak, because man is gifted with a chip which is called nefesh hamdaberes. So take one word in comparison to the nefesh hamdaberes, is completely significant, because that nefesh hamdaberes could speak words le'en kates. If he lives a million years, ideally, right, or thousands of years, he'll speak billions of words. So what's one word in comparison to Gabi Nafshem Dabes? Then you're going to say, what Al Tareb is going to go on, then you're going to say that it's truly insignificant, but could you say that it's truly a state of not? That it really is nothing, is no thing at all? Can't say that, because what is the Nafshem Dabes? It's something which is able to produce billions and billions Le'en Kate's words. So as much as it's insignificant, you can't say it's completely not, because it's one word. True, like you say, the one teaspoon of the Mediterranean is, but at the end of the day, Mediterranean is about the water.
It's something.
It's something. It's insignificant, but it's something. Yep. Can't say it's not. Okay, so then we're trying to prove the whole time that the Olam is Kael, is part of God, and the Olam is truly not, as nothing in its own. So Rebbe says, now go deeper. Now, where does this dibur come from? The way the system of man is, it starts from, the speech ultimately comes from the olam hamachshava. A healthy person speaks, especially when you say something which makes sense. A phrase, a statement which has structure and has meaning, it comes from your world of olam hamachshava, a world of machshava, a world of thought. So in the world of thoughts, that's where, in other words, there's also Isis, there's also letters, by the way. People think in languages. This has nothing to do with Torah, mitzvahs, and Yiddishkeit, or rather Torah, nothing to do with the Torah perspective. You think in languages. It's proven. In other words, that there's certain letters, combination of letters, in the world of thought as well, but they're not as so something which is tangible, let's say, like the world, like the Isis had dibur, which you could see it, you could make of it, you could define them, and so on. Elam Machshava is something, the Isis, the letters are much more refined there. And where's the proof there? For example, it would take you hours to speak, which you can think in moments. Yep. Why? Because there is Isis, there's letters there, but it's so much more refined.
You also think in images.
What?
You also might think of in images.
Right.
Right.
So there is Isis, but the Isis are much more refined. Now, take the Isis Hadibur, take for example the Is. Take for example the letter take the letter of speech. Okay, right? Getting late, but let's take the letter of speech over here. One letter of and comparison not only to the Kach Dibur, now you're comparing to the Isis HaMachshava, to the letters of thought. Now here, that one Os of Dibur is much more in comparison to Isis HaMachshava. It loses its significance not only in the context of quantity, but in the context of quality as well. Why? Because the ice, right? It's not a matter of multiple isis or the koach nafsham daberes which produces isis hadibur. In comparison to isis machshava is much deeper than isis hadibur. In other words, that one letter, the way it looks as a particular structured letter, in comparison to the world of machshava, loses its significance, and again in a qualitative level. Because in comparison, as you go deeper into the soul, there is much more soul in the world of thought than there is soul in the world of speech. Okay? Why is there more soul? What?
The less physicality, the more spirituality.
Exactly. In other words, where there's overwhelming. Why is it, for example, that you can think something which would take you in 3 minutes to think, in the world of speech it will take you 3 hours to express? Why is it? Because the more, like you say, the more the spiritual.
In concrete, words are concrete. You have to say concrete.
Exactly. A word is concrete. The world of machshava and speech is also an expression, a soul expression, but nonetheless, it's more the inferior dimension of the soul, where it becomes more gashmius, where it becomes more physical, because a word, a letter, ultimately is something which, like you say, it's concrete, it's kind of physical, you could take it, you can make it. In other words, you know what I speak, it's hard to take back a word, something which I utter. People mess up because of the speech, right? It says, someone who wants to guard his soul, guard your tongue, because once you say something, it became a mitzias, became an entity, and therefore you got to be careful what you say. In the world of machshava, no one knows what I'm thinking. A tzaddik maybe knows what you're thinking, but a regular person doesn't know what you're thinking, right? Because it's more in the more spiritual dimension of the nefesh. And the nefesh itself is very spiritual. The soul itself is very spiritual. It's not limited and confined about the past, the present, and the future. To a certain extent it is, because in thought you need those 5 minutes, you need the 5 seconds to think. So there is a past, present, and future. But ultimately the isis, the way the letters, the way they are in the machshava, are extremely much more refined. They're much more a soul expression. The soul which is transcendent of the concreteness of dibur. So dibur is also an expression of the soul, but it's an inferior level of the soul which is being expressed by speech, while machshava is a deeper level within the soul. Now getting back to this, so when you're dealing with one letter of dibur, in comparison not only to the klolos nafshe ha'medaberes, but in comparison to the klolos nafshe ha'choshevet, the world of thought, this one dibur doesn't lose its significance in the context of quantity, that 1 billion letters and so on, and what's one letter in comparison to 1 billion letters as an example, but it loses significance on a qualitative level, because in comparison to the world of machshava, it's so much more not, because in the world of machshava it's all about soul expression. In other words, it's a level where the dibur doesn't exist. In the world of machshava, dibur doesn't exist. It'll eventually produce a dibur, but this is already where the machshava came in a concrete manner, that it formed itself into a particular letter or a particular saying. In the world of machshava, it doesn't exist. So when you say that dibur doesn't exist, the world of machshava means to say it loses much more its significance, again, not only in a quantitative level, but on a qualitative level. Because in the world of machshava, the dibur almost doesn't exist. Now, we're going to stop over here. We're going to hopefully read this on next week to get this. But in the end of the day, you still cannot say that this ice is completely, totally insignificant, because in a subtle manner, in the world of machshava, there's still otiyot, there's still letters, even though they're much more refined. So, and again, that Ais Hadibur, that one us, is much less significant in comparison to the world of Machshava, but you still cannot say it's not. So the Rebbe is going to prove to you in the next class that there's a part of the soul that Isis do not even exist. And Rebbe will show it to us in feelings, for example. In the feelings, there's no Isis. Isis are produced the first time in the world of thought. In the world of feelings, there's no. In the world of Chabad, in other words, in the world of intellect, Otiyot don't exist. So there.
Actions.
What?
Always, you mean action. Always. When you say
no, letter. Os is a letter.
Oh.
Ot. Otiyot, letters do not exist. The first time letters come into emanation, to being, is in the world of thought. Prior to that, in other words, deeper within the soul, which is again the feeling. Feeling comes before. We'll explain it also. Feeling comes before thought. In other words, before meaning say it's deeper within the soul than where thought commences, initiates, and there's no otiyot. So compare that ot hadibur legabe one's feelings, then it loses its total existence. In other words, the significance is in a totality, in a total manner. Why? Because there it's not just more refined type of us to say it's insignificant, it's in a qualitative level, but there it loses its complete existence in comparison to the expression of the nefesh where otiyot don't exist. And as you go deeper within the soul, that ot doesn't exist. So what Al Rebbe is going to get at that ultimately it's an expression of God. The whole world is Kibuk Hashem Tzurei Lami. Hashem created the world with two ACS, Yud and K. Take that Hey and go deeper within God. Not only God's machshava, which also exists, obviously metaphorically Hashem established Kaviyach Li'adam, but deeper within God, in face of the essence of God, nothing really exists. So the whole, when you do see an Eilam which exists, it's only Dvar Hashem, it's only Hashem's words and energy which ultimately is infused in creation. Have a great night.